one of the plaintiffs' complaints is that the added density will lead to more traffic. Well, there are parts of the plan that address that.
I would like to sue the city of Lakeville. I don't know what's in their comprehensive plan, but I don't want them to add a single additional person, because the traffic of living in Lakeville that comes from someone living in Lakeville, you got to drive everywhere if you live in Lakeville, and no more people in Lakeville. Is that a viable lawsuit like a frivolous lawsuit that I can file?
I mean, I don't know if it'd be frivolous anymore under the articulation of the Minnesota Court of Appeals. I mean,
we're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
This is the Wedge Live podcast. I am your host, John Edwards, and today's episode is all about the 2040 plan. You may have heard some rich NIMBYs in Southwest Minneapolis are suing to stop it. I think this all goes back to like 2018 is when the legal wrangling began, and now we're almost in 2023, and this is a 10-year plan. And so it's a very interesting story, and I have a lot of questions that need to be answered. And my guests today to help answer those questions are Adam Wysopal. Adam, am I getting that correct?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Okay. And Alex Schieferdecker, which is also a long name, but I feel more confident that I got that correct. Did I?
Nailed it.
Okay. Well, thank you both for being here. Adam, you're not a lawyer, right?
No, I am a lawyer,
but a lawyer.
I work in-house. Zoning, land use, that's not my area of practice at all. So I'm sort of a hobbyist, if you will.
I forgot your bio. You are a lawyer, but not in this area. And you're also with Neighbors for More Neighbors as a volunteer.
Yeah, I do some volunteer work for them. So yeah, I got involved helping the group draft their amicus brief for the 2040 lawsuit that the Minnesota Court of Appeals just released the opinion this week about that. So yeah, here we are.
And I am a co-founder of Neighbors for More Neighbors, just full disclosure. Alex Schieferdecker is just a very knowledgeable person that I wanted to have here with us about development. You can give us reality checks about development as we're talking, and also you've been following this case. Anything you want to add about yourself?
Not really. I'm a planner and longtime observer of the Minneapolis land development scene, but only recently a new resident of Minneapolis.
And you've written some interesting things on your blog and on Streets of Men on this topic. So I am glad to have you here. Now we can get into it, and it'll probably start with Adam talking about just a legal update. What is happening? Tell us.
Yeah, so this week, the Minnesota Court of Appeals issued its opinion, and it did two things. So first, it affirmed what the district court concluded with respect to whether the 2040 plan violates the Minnesota Environmental Rights Act, which the district court, found that it did. So it upheld that. And principally what it held is that you have to assume a full and immediate build out of Minneapolis under 2040 when considering whether there is a violation of that law or not. So that was kind of the legal question before the court. However, the court bought the city's second argument that the injunction that the district court issued, which was a wholesale, you can't, Minneapolis, do any implementation of the 2040 plan, and you have to go back to the 2030 plan. The Court of Appeals found that the rationale behind that injunction was lacking. So they remanded it back to the district court to do some more legal analysis to really support that conclusion that all of the 2040 plan is out and you've got to go back to the old comprehensive plan. However, that's not necessarily the final say. The city attorney has already indicated that they're going to petition the Supreme Court to reconsider that, primary legal argument of how do you even go about assessing a violation. It's not guaranteed that the Supreme Court will accept that petition and actually hear the case. But if you recall, this case did work its way up to the Supreme Court before. And given that this is a pretty unusual and significant issue, I'm hoping they'll accept the city's petition and, hear that argument again. So to be determined. I checked today and I didn't see that anything's been filed yet from the city, but probably, this week, next week, we'll see that. So in the meantime, I'm not really sure what the current state of play is. If you recall, while the case was on appeal, the city went back to the district court and basically got an injunction on the injunction to essentially revive the 2040 plan while the appeal kind of worked its way through the process. So, I'm not sure whether that injunction of the injunction, so to speak, is in effect or what's going to happen now. I feel like things are definitely different. So curious, we'll learn probably shortly kind of what the city attorney's office is thinking and how they're going to advise the planning folks about, what you do with applications that are either in process or, developers might be contemplating. So yeah, quite chaotic at the moment, I'd say.
So the appeals court saying that the district court judge didn't give a good reason to justify why the 2030 plan is environmentally superior to the 2040 plan. Do I have that correct, that first part of my statement?
Yeah, there's kind of language in there that kind of indicates they need to do that analysis, but it's not quite like a clear directive of exactly what the district court needs to do. So, it's more of this was a little, you need to show your homework a lot more than you did.
Yeah. So we're talking about the remedy, and if the appeals court says your remedy is not justified, do some more work on it. It feels like tossing out the 2040 plan was the remedy, and therefore the 2040 plan is in effect until this district court judge fixes his work, right?
I think that is probably accurate. Now, of course, if the Supreme Court rejects the petition that the city's going to file, then the appeal process is over. And I would think that current, permission from the district court for the city to operate the 2040 plan now, I think that would go away. And in that interim period, the district court would, I'm not sure, they would maybe just issue a new opinion and set of analysis to support what it previously concluded, which, 2040 is done. You got to go back to 2030. I'm not really sure, and I could see some sort of weird compromise happening outside the court, similar to what occurred with the lawsuit that the folks brought about the charter for the police. So I could see the plaintiffs for this 2040 lawsuit working some deal out with the city, perhaps agreeing to make certain changes, and then
I refuse to let that happen. No, that's not happening, Adam.
That it's a possibility, but I think if you even talk to the folks at the city, I'm not sure they really know how this is going to unfold. It's truly, I think, uncharted territory.
How many appeals do we have left in us here? Could the Supreme Court send it? Could this go to the Supreme Court, then get sent back, and then go to the Supreme Court again? Is that a likely outcome?
I think it could, and I mean, I would say that's a possibility. I mean, these plaintiffs have, stuck with this the entire time, and I don't think that the city's backing away from, their principal complaint that, that just a legal analysis that you have to do consider a full and immediate build out of the city under the comp plan. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. So I think when you have kind of this beef going on, it's gonna continue as long as possible. But we'll see.
It's a 10-year plan, and like the lawsuit started in 2018. We're about to enter 2023, if we have another 2 years of this left, I don't know, we're almost to the point where we start talking about our next 10-year plan, the 2050 plan. And this is all very irritating. And it feels like, Alex, we're not even arguing about the substance. It feels like very little discussion is had about like I feel like it's an open and shut case that this is, environmentally speaking, a good thing. If you live in Minneapolis, you will drive less. You will live a more energy efficient lifestyle. People who live in cities, it's just a fact, are more energy efficient, are less of a burden on the planet than if we force them to live in Lakeville. And I am very frustrated that we're not even having the discussion, which is supposed to be at the heart of it. They're using environmental law to stop a comprehensive plan, and it's all disingenuous and in bad faith.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, but this is definitely the most infuriating part, because I understand that this this is a court of law, and so legal arguments have to be made, but the city seemingly from the start decided to fight this lawsuit on the grounds of comprehensive plans not being challengeable under state environmental law and this sort of full build-out presumption. And I think that they're right on that point. But in fighting that point, they also did not challenge the environmental analysis that the plaintiffs brought up. And so it seems like that environmental analysis just is sort of now assumed by the courts to be true. And, what I found so funny about this appeals court ruling is that it sends this environmental question squarely back to the district court. And now the district court, I guess, has to assess the 2040 plan and the 2030 plan in terms of their environmental benefits. What happens if it finds that the 2030 plan was worse for the environment than the 2040 plan, which is, I think, what a fair and independent analysis would conclude? Does it then rule that both plans violated MIRA? Does it have to look at the plan before that?
Let's go back to the future, to the 2020 plan.
I mean, I don't understand, how this process is supposed to work out, how it's supposed to make a fair ruling given the sort of judicially imposed strictures that it's under. The other part I don't understand is that there's been so much focus on the land use component of the plan, this sort of full build out. But the 2040 plan is not just a land use plan. There are many other components of the plan. When you're assessing the full build out of the plan, are you also assessing a full build out of the bus and bike lanes that are a part of the Transportation Action Plan? Are you assessing a full build out of bioswales and other types of stormwater infrastructure that the plan calls for? I don't think that any of the judges in this case have really thought through what they're talking about. They have focused so narrowly on the land use plan, but if you assume an increase in density and the impacts that come with that, there are many other parts of the plan that are designed to ameliorate those effects. And so how can you analyze the land use plan without analyzing the component parts which are supposed to ameliorate the effects of density on the city's infrastructure? It doesn't make sense to me. It's very cherry-picked. And throughout this entire process, it has felt to me like the judges have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, we have a transportation action plan that was motivated by and it has underpinnings in the 2040 plan that is very aggressive, and I like it a lot. It's very supportive of bus and bike infrastructure, as you say. And so it all feels very obvious that this is a plus environmentally.
One of the plaintiff's complaints is that the added density will lead to more traffic. Well, there are parts of the plan that address that. So how can the district court judge, assess the traffic impacts of the full build-out of the land use without also assessing the traffic impacts of the full build-out of the other parts of the plan? Whether or not you believe the full build-out presumption is a good legal fiction or not, and I don't think it is, but why only land use gets a full build-out? Why do the other parts of the plan not? I don't think that doesn't even seem to be on the radar of any of these courts.
Also, Adam, let's talk about traffic here. I would like to sue the city of Lakeville. I don't know what's in their comprehensive plan, but I don't want them to add a single additional person to their city. They're a fast-growing little city in Minnesota, and I don't want them to add any people because the traffic of living in Lakeville that comes from someone living in Lakeville, you got to drive no matter everywhere if you live in Lakeville, and I think we should sue the city of Lakeville to throw out their comprehensive plan. No more people in Lakeville. Is that a viable lawsuit like a frivolous lawsuit that I can file?
I mean, I don't know if it'd be frivolous anymore under the articulation of the Minnesota Court of Appeals. I mean, they even go on in their opinion to say that public policy is basically supporting their decision and that they want to have a really robust, civil cause of action that folks can bring to quote unquote protect the environment. So yeah, I think any high growth city, whether it's a suburb or Minneapolis, St. Paul, if you consider them high growth, could, be ripe grounds for these types of lawsuits. However, I'm not sure that, necessarily the plaintiff would always prevail. Getting back to Alex's point, I think the city attorney's office kind of dropped the ball to some degree and didn't get their environmental expert lined up in enough time to provide the court with an opinion. So it's possible that, hey, if the Court of Appeals opinion is upheld by the Supreme Court and we have this law of the land where in any lawsuit that's considering whether a comprehensive plan or zoning rules violates MIRA, you have to presume a full and immediate build out. I think what could end up being is that you just have the classic battle of the experts. So you have the plaintiff's experts saying, of course, this is going to be so damaging and destructive to the waterlands or this or that. And you'll have the city's experts doing probably what Minneapolis should have done, going through the mitigating factors and doing a more holistic, assessment of what that comprehensive plan is really trying to accomplish. So, we'll see. But I think, filing those types of lawsuits might get the attention of the state legislature, which I think should ultimately fix this issue and create another exemption under MIRA, excluding folks from bringing lawsuits against, comprehensive plans or even the Met Council's kind of approval and adoption and oversight of all this.
My understanding, Adam, is that the comprehensive plans are exempted under most of Minnesota's environmental law, but not explicitly so under MIRA. And so the plaintiffs in this case have sort of found the one law that does not explicitly bar their case, and that in their first go around, the district court and the appeals court both said, it's sort of obvious that because of this context, comprehensive plans are not expected to be challengeable under MIRA. And it was the Supreme Court who sort of opened the door to this and I think really opened Pandora's box by saying, no, MIRA does not expressly ban challenges to comprehensive plans, therefore it's allowed. Am I right about that?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, generally speaking, you can't bring environmental type lawsuits against zoning related matters. And more than that, I mean, generally speaking, it's really hard to legally challenge city decisions around zoning, period. The state gives them power to enact a zoning ordinance and implement it, and they don't want to normally interfere and second guess what a municipality does with that power. But unfortunately, you're right, the Minnesota Supreme Court in the prior appeal kind of provided, ammunition that both the district court used and the Court of Appeals. And I can understand why the judges on the Court of Appeal were so fixated on that. Like, no court wants to be overturned. And so, yeah, they were really focused on that language where you have to presume a full and immediate build out. And unfortunately, this city just didn't have an adequate expert. So when you just run through the legal analysis, to them, I think it was an easy way for them to rule. So hopefully, the Supreme Court kind of has more time to consider the consequences of its prior decision and the impact not only in Minneapolis, but, the potential impact to other, acts of municipalities and their comp plans or zoning or whatever. But yeah, I mean, this is not great. And ideally, if the courts don't fix this mess, hopefully the state legislature does in the upcoming session.
Here's the bare minimum that the Supreme Court should do, is provide some clarification on what they mean by a full build-out. It's not just the problem that I mentioned earlier, where only the land use is assumed to be fully built out and not the other mitigating issues. But as we know, there's no difference in the plan in the FAR, the shape, dimensions, or whatever of a single-family home or a triplex in the interior zones of the city. So why would a triplex be assumed to be a full build-out versus a single-family home if they occupy the same amount of land? The zoning and built form plan also calls for Orchestra Hall, City Hall, to be, I mean, those sites are for Transit 50 built form. Does the court need to assume that City Hall has been demolished and replaced by a 50-story office tower? Does it need to assume that Orchestra Hall has been demolished and replaced? There's no height limit on a 100-story office tower. These are questions that I feel like the courts have not thought about at all.
And we also have answers to these questions because, as I said, we're like 4 years into the lawsuit, and we're 3 years into the plan's like implementation. And like we have results. Alex, you wrote a thing about how like 70 some units we added in 2.5 years in the formerly single family zones with the up to triplex and fourplex housing units, where the whole neighborhoods have not been bulldozed. The full build out of our formerly single family areas is not happening. And that's what the concern is of the very wealthy people funding this lawsuit, is what happens in my single family neighborhood, and it's not happening. And do we get 6 years in and can we consider it? I know I've asked this question a million times and there's no answer to like what a judge is going to do with this ultimately. Like it's up to the whims of people who are not really acquainted with zoning issues. I'm extremely frustrated.
Well, what's annoying about that is that it feels like the judiciary has misunderstood the purpose of a plan like this. It's not to prescribe this is going to be built here. It's to provide that flexibility. The flexibility may or may not be needed. That's to be determined based on whether X number of people in the United States or abroad want to move to Minnesota. We don't know what the future holds. Minnesota could continue to grow at a slow but steady pace. The Twin Cities could continue to attract new people, or Target and all these corporations could move to Dallas, and then suddenly the city could start shrinking. We have no idea what the future holds. The purpose of a plan like this is to provide the flexibility so that whatever that level of growth in the next 10, 20 years, we can accommodate it. Well, the judges have instead taken that flexibility as a mandate, but that's not the case at all. No plan like this is expected to ever achieve a full build-out. That's just not the purpose of comprehensive planning. It's to provide the flexibility for future scenarios. It doesn't provide the growth in and of itself. The plan doesn't create that scenario. It just opens the window for a variety of different outcomes.
And this plan's not going to birth a single baby. Like, the people exist and they're going to live somewhere. I see on the local news, like the state demographer sharing some concerns about, population growth is a little flat. That's bad. And I think it's accepted. You'd rather be growing than shrinking as a whether a city or a state, you'd rather be growing than shrinking. And I think as an environmental matter in Minnesota, we'd rather have these people living in Minneapolis, living like in one of the Twin Cities, driving less. It's mathematically and scientifically proven you will drive less. You will be more energy efficient in your lifestyle if you live in the Twin Cities than elsewhere. And so, yeah, I'm repeating myself.
There also doesn't seem to be a way what are the boundaries of the environmental impacts? Obviously, stormwater
My
impacts.
backyard. It's my backyard. That's the boundary.
Stormwater impacts in Minneapolis are not just defined by the political boundaries. Air quality impacts in Minneapolis are not just defined by the political boundaries of the city. So how do you assess the environmental impacts of increased density in Minneapolis? If you're focused only on the political boundaries of the city, then yeah, increased density would lead to more concrete and more impervious surfaces and so on. But obviously, as we know and the listeners know, what it really needs to be taken into consideration is the effect on the regional growth. Because as you say, either people live here or they're going to live elsewhere. And here in Minneapolis is the most environmentally friendly place for them to live.
There's also another thing I'm frustrated, aside from the lack of a thorough discussion about the environmental impacts. I'd love to have it. If you sued the city to have a more thorough discussion about the environmental impacts of various ways of designing a city, I'm glad to have that conversation. There's also the idea we had a massive conversation locally about the 2040 plan, years of engagement, hotly contested, hard fought. And this was decided by policy experts and elected officials and residents. And now it's a judge who has we're making new law with judges who they shouldn't be expected to be all that acquainted with it because they're accepting all kinds of cases all the time. And it feels like we decided through the proper way, which I think is the political process, and now it's being thrown to judges. If this is up to judges, I don't know that they're equipped to decide this correctly.
They're definitely not. I mean, even their insistence that a full and immediate build out isn't in their minds speculative is just, I think, absurd by itself and quite revealing to Alex's prior commentary. They just don't understand what the intent behind the comp plan is and the consequences of it in our regional context. So yeah, I'm going to be repeating myself again. I just really hope that there are some lawmakers that are paying attention to this and are willing to have the, I think, political will to really push a legislative change through this session. And I'm not, going to be too optimistic about the chances of that occurring, because it's really, I think, going to be viewed as trying to do something that's really only going to benefit Minneapolis, maybe not, if not just Minneapolis, maybe Minneapolis and St. Paul.
We've got the trifecta, don't we, Adam?
We do have the trifecta, but it's who's going to spend political capital really pushing forward a bill that I think many are going to view as a Minneapolis-only problem. And that's why I think maybe if there isn't a willing partner or partners, people might have to consider suing other cities in the region to kind of make the point that what the courts have done here is quite ridiculous and open the door to some ridiculous second guessing of the normal process, which, cities don't have to go through the level of engagement that Minneapolis did with 2040 plan. I think under the statute, they just have to do one public hearing when they're considering changes to their comp plan and then normally a 2/3 vote on the city council. So, the fact that Minneapolis, like you described, went through so much engagement, it was the political talker and topic of town. So it's just kind of disrespectful to, the citizens, council members, the people within CPED who worked tremendously to put this together. So yeah, I hope ultimately there's good news to report at the end of this saga, but we shall see.
Also, how do we refer to the group of NIMBYs who started this, who initiated this lawsuit? The respondents, the plaintiffs. What's the term?
I mean, they were the plaintiffs and then the respondents in Court of Appeals, but I just refer to them kind of just as the smart growth people because I think that's the principal group that's spearheading
another
the
thing.
lawsuit.
They stole their name. They created this group for the sole purpose of suing to stop an environmental good, and they stole their name from Smart Growth America, which is like a known and established group that actually espouses what is commonly associated with the phrase smart growth, and this group does not. It's a total scam. It's a scam, a transparent scam, and we're so many years into it, and I'm frustrated again. Alex?
Yeah, it would be like a group calling themselves pro-choice and suing to block abortions or something. I'll say one thing about the plans, which is that to some extent this is an odd fight, because since the 2040 plan was adopted, the number of homes that have been approved and permitted in the city has decreased. It has not gone. I don't think it's because of the plan. I think it's because
it dipped. I saw a chart that you posted. It dipped.
It's because of COVID and all these,
and then it kind of recovered. Right?
Well,
didn't the line
still
come back up a little?
It's still low. It recovered a little bit, but it's still lower. And there are all kinds of other factors that are at play: interest rates, the cost of materials, and so on. So this sort of goes both ways. In one way, it's sort of strange that there's all this fighting about this land use policy, when in reality the previous status quo, the one that the district court was going to send us back to, was also very, very permissive, and also it provided more than enough ammunition to constantly give developers variances on parking and that kind of stuff. And if we were to be forced to go back to it, I don't think a heck of a lot would change with regard to the types of developments that are getting built in Minneapolis, because bankers and developers have already seen what succeeds here. And I don't think that there's any putting the genie back in the bottle when it comes to lower parking and a lot of features like that.
There are some ways in which the previous plan was more permissive. One of the motivators, as I would often hear from people like Lisa Bender, who was kind of a driving force behind the 2040 plan, is we're trying to make sure people know what to expect out of the zoning code, rather than have it open to all these variances and CUPs, many more variances. And I don't know if this has come to pass in reality, but the theory was we're granting a lot of variances because this is allowed. These variances are allowed and we're granting them. We're going to have a plan where there's much less leeway. Expectations are, you kind of know what you're going to get going into it, and it doesn't give the appearance of, well, you're giving all these exceptions to developers and giving the planning commission and city council all this discretion about who do we like, which development do we like. If it's in a part of the city where people won't have an outcry about it, maybe we grant more variances in that case than others. Sort of an equity kind of thing. Am I right?
It's also very hard for me to imagine that if struck down and told to go back to the drawing board, the city of Minneapolis would not produce something extremely similar and probably just defend it better, or would just have to produce an environmental report on an environmental assessment of the comp plan, which would be expensive and would take time. But I mean, ultimately, the facts are not on the side of the smart growth people when it comes to, is this environmentally beneficial or not? And so if the district court has to make that assessment, or if the city has to ultimately commission that assessment and pay for it themselves, this whole process is very frustrating. But the thing I would constantly keep saying is that the sky is not going to fall if 2040 is struck down through whatever, because we know so much of this stuff already, and so much progress has been made through the 2040 process in terms of how people think about these issues and the development that's already been built.
I hope that's true. I don't know if the city attorney's office is bluffing, but I'm recalling a statement from one of the folks that's been participating in the litigation saying that they don't know what it would mean to go back to 2030. Like, they just don't understand how that would work.
Adam, can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
So things like parking reform, I think we went down to like no requirements at all citywide. Like that was an outcome of the 2040 plan, but it's also like an independent ordinance that's motivated by the 2040 plan. Like single room occupancy is now in the zoning code. Are things like this, is an outcome like, oh, you have to undo those ordinances that have been enacted?
I think that's kind of the heart of the issue, is like really what, unless the district court is crystal clear and prescribes it all, which it doesn't seem like they're equipped to even do that because they're not an expert in this and they would just be kind of, guessing or making stuff up, then it's up to the city to figure this out. And I think that's what they're getting at, is like, we don't know what we would have to change legislatively within our zoning code to go back to 2030. Now, maybe, like I said, they're bluffing and it's easy for them just to go pull back prior revisions of the zoning code and just basically adopt that all. But I'm hoping that the city has been thinking through this and kind of has different contingency plans lined up so there is as minimal of a period of disruption as possible. Because I think if I were a developer right now and I maybe have property I'm holding or considering redeveloping, they're probably just going to sit back and like, I don't know what to do. The rules under 2040 are more favorable. Maybe I just sit back and let things play out for a couple of years and then I revisit these projects. So, I mean, this, Alex, I think is right. Maybe the sky won't fall and we'll get to a position at least where there's enough of a permission structure to continue doing the type of a development I think we all think is beneficial in the best interest of Minneapolis. But I think this could just have a chilling effect in the interim. And maybe 2023 is going to be a really low year for projects that go through the approval process. But, we'll see. And I'm hoping that, the city attorney's office and planning folks are spending a lot of time thinking through their different options here.
I think it would have an extremely confusing effect. We've already seen 2 projects that were permitted in the past season where they were appealed to the city council, and the appellants used the same argument. They used the same lawyers, which was basically like, you saw the transcript from the appeals court, like they're clearly going to agree completely with the district court and got the 2040 plan, so you might as well just get ahead of the game and reverse these approvals. And it was kind of I think that they were just, first of all, they were wrong because the appellate court did not 100% agree with the district court. But second, it's very clear that what they were doing was positioning themselves to challenge the approvals of those projects in court later on. I think that if 2040 is gotten rid of, I think that the surest bet is that there will be a huge wave of litigation of people challenging projects that were permitted under the 2040 plan and saying, the approvals of this should be withdrawn. Now, again, I would argue so many of these projects would have been permitted under the previous plan as well, but that won't stop people from throwing it to a court to decide. And as we've seen, the courts may not be the best judges of whether this would be the case or not.
And it's also under the old zoning code impossible to say what would have been allowed because variances come into play, and there's like the subjective nature of the planning commission and which planning commissioners are voting which way, what are their opinions. These are all like, zoning is an entirely political thing. It's not like zoning codes aren't written in stone when variances come into play, so it would be impossible to go back and say what would have been allowed exactly.
I just keep coming to the fact that there are such obvious, to me, to a planner, to anyone who's knee-deep in this stuff, there are so many obvious logistical questions that the courts seem to not have considered at all with the remedies that they've proposed, with the sort of legal fictions that they've adopted to adjudicate this case. it's very frustrating to be in the hands of decisions that don't make any sense.
I think it's worth going back and emphasizing things in the plan, in the 2040 plan, have to be enacted by ordinance. Like zoning code isn't changed automatically. Like piece by piece, things that are in the plan are being adopted. Some things that are in the plan will never be adopted. That's a thing that happens with comprehensive plans.
And that's the logic for exempting comprehensive plans from environmental legislation in the first place. A plan is a plan. It's words on paper. It's not an action. It's not a policy. So what are we challenging here? If they had a problem with the triplex zoning, maybe they should have sued when the built form rules were adopted. If they had a problem with the parking minimums or being eliminated, they should have sued when that was adopted. If they had a problem with occlusionary zoning, they could have sued that policy. If they have a problem with a specific project, sue that project.
Yeah.
Those are actions and policies. That to me is a discrete thing that you can sue, and a court can say, yes, this is good, or no, this isn't, or, no, this isn't, and very cleanly sever that from everything else.
And that's typically, go ahead.
Well, to challenge the plan, what is being, it gets to the point I was making earlier about there being only a focus on the land use and not the rest of the context. And the point you were making about these ordinances that are inspired by the plan, but not, directly a part of it. How do you determine what is and isn't part of the plan? How do you determine what is and isn't being challenged? Nobody seems to know.
Yeah, and turning like one line in a comprehensive plan, like the single room occupancy thing, ended up becoming an ordinance that had this only applies to certain actors. The comprehensive plan was not that detailed. A bunch of political decisions were made to try to interpret that single line in a comp plan into legislation by elected officials. It's also worth saying, Adam, I think you've kind of pointed to this, but typically like environmental protection lawsuits when it comes to like land use and development projects are typically like project by project. This is unprecedented that we're going after this big expansive plan that I don't know. We're breaking new ground in environmental law by not doing it project by project and saying, no, we're going after the entire plan.
And I don't know what the intent behind Mirror was. I mean, someone could probably go back and read the transcripts and discussions around it. But I highly doubt that at the time it was adopted that the legislature was contemplating folks bringing suits against their own city for, housing development primarily. I think the intention was more focused on, mining, extracting resources, mass agriculture, things that we all understand to have unique and significant impacts in a very concentrated way. So yeah, it's just truly ridiculous that we're at this point. But I don't think we're unfortunately the only state to be dealing with plaintiffs who get quite creative and utilize these state environmental laws to basically block housing development. So I guess we're not alone in that boat.
Adam, has the fact that Neighbors for More Neighbors and Sierra Club and an actual environmental org, Sierra Club, signed on in support of the city against the fake environmentalist lawsuit, is that having an impact? These amicus briefs, is that a waste of time? Do judges take that seriously?
I don't think it's a waste of time because at minimum it's bringing more people into the fold as far as an advocacy standpoint goes. The court really didn't get into any commentary about how it digested the amicus briefs, but I do think it can help, and hopefully, given that multiple groups did participate, perhaps that's another reason why the Minnesota Supreme Court will want to accept the petition and hear this case. The fact that there have been, amicus party kind of demonstrates that there's a lot of, I guess, public concern about this case and ultimate resolution. So, yeah, I do think ultimately it helps.
I think it helps to have a real environmental group as a part of it, and not the fake one. Alex?
Just speculating, obviously, but the fact that the court found that there was not sufficient basis to just assume that the 2040 plan was more environmentally damaging than the status quo, the 2030, the Minneapolis Plan for Comprehensive Growth. I don't know. It seems possible to me that they realized that there is not just one side to the environmental argument here, and that if all of these other groups are insisting that the 2040 plan is in fact environmentally beneficial, that maybe the district court cannot just assume that those groups are lying. So obviously they didn't say in the brief, well, we find the wise words of neighbors from more neighbors to be so persuasive, but it seems possible to me that they were influenced by that.
Are there any topics that either of you would like to cover that we've forgotten, that we've blown past, that we're not devoting enough attention to?
I just think that we're seeing, I mentioned these two appeals that came before the city council saying, 2040, the writing's on the wall, it's going to die, better start bailing out now. We're seeing that kind of challenge before the Planning Commission. I mean, right before the Planning Commission's final meeting of the year in 2022 and before the Biz Committee's first meeting of 2023, there is going to be a discussion about this attempt to downzone 2 blocks of Northeast Minneapolis. I think that we're seeing that this lawsuit has at minimum sort of emboldened people who would like to sort of carve up the plan and sort of undermine a lot of the intent behind some of the land use rules that were put forward. And
I think the phrase you're looking for is "not in my backyard."
That is, yeah. Well, the "not in my backyard" folks are certainly drawing sustenance from this lawsuit as it continues.
The only thing that comes to my mind is let's start paying attention to see what council members are saying, and also candidates for city council. Several have already announced there will be some competitive ward races, and I'm curious to see how this plays into some of those perhaps more contentious races. I think we know where the mayor currently is. The city attorney has expressed their view that this is a BS decision and they're going to fight it to the fullest extent possible. So I think, the mayor is still a supporter of the 2040 plan, but I'm kind of curious to see how this plays in the political arena in the upcoming city council race.
Yeah, but one thing we know about the mayor, he can declare victory after literally anything. So he could screw this up real bad and still declare victory, and no harm to Jacob Fry. That's my only concern about that. But I hope our new city attorney I wish her well in defending this in court. All right, I think we're at the end. Unless last call for final thoughts. I can't believe we did it in like 48 minutes. That's incredible. I thought this would go on forever.
We could probably go on forever.
We probably could.
It was fun, though.
Okay, thank you both. Alex Schieferdecker, Adam Wysopal. This was a lot of fun, and I hope people... talking about some of this kind of drags, like talking about the legal details at the beginning. I don't know if anyone made it through that, Adam.
That's okay.
And I blame you.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to tell people they should, at the end, that they should push through and get to the end, because they won't hear this. But I hope you did push through to the end. Congratulations to listeners for pushing through to the end.
Write your legislators, right? Like, tell them that they should fix this issue.
Yeah. Call to action. Alex Schieferdecker is right. Call to action here at the end email candidates, call candidates and city council members and the mayor and say, defend this like crazy, and like tell the state legislature to fix this. We need comprehensive plans to be exempt from these legal shenanigans from fake environmentalists. It's not.
Or we're
productive.
coming for Lake Elmo.
Yeah, or Lakeville. Lakeville is the villain here.
We're coming for all of them.
Yeah. Okay. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.